So Miriam, I'm recently back from sabbatical, and I noticed that the exhibition had changed. So before we had Faces of Faith, and now you've changed the exhibition.
Yes.
In your new role as Executive Director. Tell us, what's the exhibition now?
So we wanted to find images that really represent all our research projects here at the Woolf Institute. So every one of the researchers was looking for an image, then wrote a short description with a short bio, and it gives a really, really good introduction to all the projects that we're doing here.
So we're going to be walking through
Yes.
the research of the Woolf Institute.
Yes.
Well, let's start. What by chance is the first one?
Well, by chance, the first one is actually my own.
I'm surprised.
Very close to our beautiful Western room up there. And it's blue, so it's close to the sky. My research is concerned with correspondence from the late 18th, early 19th century. Correspondence written by Jewish merchants living in Muslim Egypt. And I'm very interested in how they coped with living in Egypt with the Jewish communities, how they were connected to other Jewish communities, how they were connected to other Muslim traders, how they exported goods to Europe and imported goods.
So what are we actually looking at here?
So I chose this image, even though it's not that representative. Normally we work on beautiful whole letters, but these minute fragments, they really captured the imagination of people. Whenever we show these small ones, people can relate, people puzzle, people like puzzles. So and it's also very representative for the Ghanese because we have the different kinds of materials. There's paper, there's vellum. Some of these things here are tiny pieces of letters, of documents. There's something written by one of the most prolific writers in the Ghanese, one of the most prolific scribes. There are some printed fragments. So it's a really nice snapshot of all the different literary genres in the Ghanese.
Excellent. So we begin with a puzzle.
Yes.
And then behind you, this looks quite puzzling too.
It does. And it's not immediately obvious what this project is about. But this is a project that we call the Indicators Project. And it's done by one of our researchers, Kitty Alone. And it deals with measures of success
and
failure. And she's trying to find ways of evaluating interface initiatives. So she wants to see what works, what doesn't work, what sort of actions have which sort of consequences. And I think this project will be really helpful in the future to evaluate or to help develop interface projects.
I think that's absolutely right, because for so many years people have worked in interfaith, like decades.
Such as yourself, 20 years?
30.
30?
It feels like 40. But the point is that I'm often asked, how do you know it makes any difference? What are the criteria for evaluating the success and failure? So this project is one of the first that actually is going to try and achieve that. And once we have some kind of metrics or some kind of criteria, then we'll be better able to discuss the transfer of success,
Absolutely.
which is so important today. So, but what have we actually got in the image?
So the image, I think this is an old Egyptian sort of measurement stick. And Kitty thought it would be very beautiful because it's just as obscure and as complex as the things that she hopes to develop in her project.
Excellent. Well, let's move downstairs. So, Miriam, tell us what's in this photograph and why it's been chosen.
So this picture represents the research projects of one of our newest PhD scholars, Chris Cooper Davies. And he works on minorities and majority dynamics in Iraq. So this is a picture of a shrine in Najaf, one of those holy shrines of Shia Islam. And what he's really interested in is the relations and the interactions between the Shia majority and the Sunni minority in Iraq.
And of course, that's not just relevant in the 1920s. It's absolutely relevant now, isn't it?
It's absolutely relevant now because we see that especially the Sunni Shia relations seem to be a very, very dominant sort of cause of conflict at the moment in the Middle East, even more so than Israel
Yeah, I was just about to say actually, because it's still the early stages of Chris's PhD, but it'd be interesting what echoes there are from the lessons of the intra-Muslim conversation and tension and encounter that might apply to the Christian and the Jewish, the internal conversation.
Exactly. And at this time, Iraq still had substantial Christian minorities and a good-sized Jewish community. So his research focuses on a time of very pluralist Middle East, and that's why we are very interested in this, because it's not only inter-Muslim relations, but also how they relate to Christians, how they relate to Jews.
That'll be very interesting. And behind you, you've got this almost Victorian portrait, a research project looking at the question of law.
Yes. So this is by our research fellow, Dr. Patrick Nash. And it's an image he chose of Frederick William Maitland, who's apparently the founder of modern English legal history. So he's very, very interested in legal history. And he's working on a project that deals with how best to incorporate religious minority law, or like religious minorities and their laws into English law, sort of addressing gaps, existing gaps, such as when it comes to marriages performed by imams or by rabbis.
Because he's specifically focusing, isn't he, on Islamic tradition, so when Islamic law rubs up against English civil law.
Exactly.
And it's so important, as you say, marriages, in particular divorces, and to make sure there's some sense of equality and...
Yes. And apparently, I mean, he says that with just a few tweaks, you can incorporate these sort of laws into English law, and that's what he's working on.
And in fact, even though he's only 1 year, is he 18 months into the project?
Yeah, so 10 months into the project.
10 months into the project. He's already being asked to contribute to government change and the judiciary here, so it's great.
Yes.
Again, it shows the relevance, doesn't it? We've dealt with law, we've looked at sociology, we've obviously got the medieval and the 1920s, so I think already we've got a sense of that diversity of the research.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, let's carry on. Now, this is unusual because John Muller isn't officially a researcher.
No,
but here he is, he did his PhD under Richard Evans, and he's continuing his research with us.
Yes, I mean, it shows the versatility of our development office, I think. He works on Jewish retail in the 1910s, 1920s, and then sort of into the 1930s with the Nazi Party coming into power, and then sort of these, all these shops being sort of forcibly sort of nationalized and bought up by sort of Aryan Germans. And he's just had his first book contract, so we have even our development sort of office, produces proper research.
That's fantastic. So here we have another measuring device. Tell us about that, and then perhaps I'll talk a little bit about Julian's project on the tolerance index.
Yes, I think Julian, the researcher on this project, he really loves that image because he's a statistician, so the coloring scheme here really appeals to him, because the visualization of all the statistics in these maps is something that really speaks to him. But actually, you are RPI on this project.
Well, maybe you should be asking me the questions.
I should be asking you the questions. Yes.
So ask me a question.
What is this project about?
Well, this project was initially called the Eye-to-Eye Index, from intolerance to inclusion, but we decided to rename it and call it the Tolerance Index, because one of the most difficult aspects of it is, how do you measure tolerance? I mean, intolerance is easier, but how do you actually measure tolerance? And the great thing about having a statistician, a social scientist like Julian, is he offers a bit of rigour to the creation of the metrics. And this autumn, we will be announcing the first findings, what we're calling the emergent findings, just in case we need to modify them, of an index that measures tolerance in England and Wales down to constituency level. So that's quite deep.
And I had a peek preview, and the results are
going to be interesting.
Fascinating, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so here we've got this what's a beautiful picture of a church in Italy. And we have another researcher here, another PhD student, I should say, Jessica.
So yes, Jessica is one of our PhD students who works on religion, devotion and ritual at sea and around the sea in the medieval Mediterranean. And I absolutely love this image because it's a fully functioning church which is just adjacent to these living quarters and then to a bar. So basically church, living quarters and bar form one complex, which is very medieval, which is, exactly how, cities grew, how sort of
holy space was conceptualized. It's like when you go to Jerusalem and you have to go through these markets, to these tiny little souks in order to go to the Holy Sepulchre. I was shocked the first time, but you have to go basically through a carpet store to enter the holiest of holy for Christianity.
So tell us a little bit about Jessica's research, because she's looking at the Mediterranean Sea and different devotional practices.
Well, she looks at sort of ritual at sea, so what people did at ships, what sort of practices, the religious practices they practiced on the ships. But she's also looking at particular sites and traditions that developed at those sites, how these religious practices spread, how they sort of reflect much older traditions, sort of, for example, pagan traditions. So it's a very, very exciting project.
And again, it's a sign of the encounter.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, again, sort of, with the Islamic influences from North Africa, with older pagan influences. I mean, basically this sort of, these emerging of ritual practices out of a much older common pot.
Fantastic. So Rodrigo was our first Cambridge Woolf scholar.
Yes, my firstborn PhD student.
Your first love. And of course he's finished his PhD now,
yes,
and he's submitted, but he's working on a research project.
Yes, he's now a researcher here, and he's working on, I mean, it's very similar to what he did in his PhD, and this is his finger showing the word citizen in this old Spanish document. He's very interested in how with the reconquest of Spain, so with a shifting with a shift from Islam to Christianity, how the law accommodated these big minorities that, or sort of even majorities at the time. How would the newly conquered sort of Christian state deal with us, Muslims and Jewish citizens? So he's really interested in these navigations, how citizen rights for members of all communities were sort of prescribed in documents in sort of citizenship.
And this is like
rules.
600 years ago.
Yes.
And can you give an example of something that's relevant for now?
Well, it shows that frontiers, where you have these frictions between different communities, are actually the most lively communities. This is where things have to be negotiated.
Because you're living next to your neighbour of a different faith tradition.
For pragmatic need, you need to negotiate. And I mean, this is one of those big sort of theories about multicultural, about diverse countries. They are the most vibrant, they produce the best art, and they produce the best economies because they have these frictions. They have this need for constant negotiating.
This is another research project of yours, and in this case you're working with Mohammed.
Yes. So Mohammed is my postdoc, he's Egyptian, and we really found each other. I got hold of these letters by pure coincidence. I was invited as a speaker at a conference, and this man comes up to me and he says, I basically have this box of Arabic letters, would you like to work on them? And they are from a period where I had never seen any other letters produced. So I was extremely excited, but I thought I'll never be able to do this. I don't have the time. And then Mohammed, out of the blue, contacted me and asked me whether I had any work for him. And this is how this came about. And I love this image because it has, I mean, it's beautiful Arabic script. It's a very sort of interesting little sort of postscript. It says, this letter is very important, it's very important that this letter is being sent. You should really send it. And the person who sends this will receive a reward from God. So, it's sort of just showing how important this letter is that we've reproduced here. It has these beautiful red wax seals, where if we could look at the original, we could see little sort of details of script and of names. So
I can see how much you love even that image. and actually the language of the letters are quite beautiful as well.
Yeah, they're very, very beautiful. They are these letters written by Christian merchants who live in Italy, back to their relatives and business partners in Egypt. And they're most interesting. It's all about how different life is in Egypt, how much freer people are. They constantly complain how they lose their children because the children just live in this free Italian society and they don't listen to their elders. So
that's not changed, right?
Yeah, no, it's a very common complaint, I think. And then they talk about, sort of feeling homesick for Egypt. They talk about their merchant wares, of course. They talk about their connections with Christian dignitaries in Rome who also happen to be Egyptian. So it's absolutely mesmerizing content.
And again, one of the themes that strikes me just walking down the staircase and seeing these projects is the relevance of all the projects, whether they're contemporary or whether they're 600 years old like Rodrigo's, or this is 300, 250 years old, these letters.
Yes.
They all have significance for today's questions.
Absolutely, because I mean, here again we see trust, we see how communities have to work together, different religious communities have to work together to be successful in the world. We see how important it is to have a common basis. I mean, these merchants from all the three religions, they had to trust each other because otherwise business wouldn't work. Business was based on trust.
Yeah. We've moved down the staircase and now we've come to a beautiful photograph of a man playing an oud, and this is another research project that you're managing with two researchers called Living in Harmony, and I have to say it's a lovely project, but tell us a bit about it.
So this is an image of Ahmed Mukhtar, who was one of the musicians that we asked to play in a big concert we organized at the Ismaili Center, where we had this amazing diverse audience of Ismaili Muslims, Sunni Muslims, a lot of members of the Jewish community, of course a lot of members of normal sort of white Londoners, and it was such a beautiful concert in this beautiful venue with this beautiful painting behind, which is sort of Arabic calligraphy. And it was the sort of the culmination of the first year of our Living in Harmony project, which deals with Jewish and Muslim communities sort of remembering their past, their common past through music. So the project focuses on the one hand on educating people about the multicultural part of the Middle East, which is now often forgotten. People think the Middle East is sort of sort of purely Muslim, but of course it was the land of cultural and religious pluralism. I mean, you had vast Christian communities, Jewish communities, and all these people made music together, and through the music I think we're trying to reconnect to this multicultural past. And we have basically two sub-projects. We have one that focuses on the Muslim-Jewish encounter in Baghdad, and then we have, on the other hand, we have our researcher Dunya here, who's in the photo, trying to connect to refugees from Syria and to see how they remember their own sort of past and how they remember Syria through music.
So if you think about it, we've been down the stairs, we've looked at statistics and social science, we've looked at texts, we've looked at legal studies, and now we're looking at music.
Yes.
So all these different disciplines that we have here to study the relationship between religion and society. And do you feel with the music and the arts as a whole that is a particularly rich area?
Well, I mean, it's certainly something where like the wider public can easily relate. I mean, a lot of people wouldn't sort of get very excited about statistics, although, I mean, I'm so excited about statistics, but people get very, very excited about music. Music touches something really deep inside people. Yes. So music, even if it's written for a particular group, it usually translates very, very easily to the wider population.
And on the whole, it brings people together, doesn't it?
It brings people together, absolutely.
Yes. So we're now nearly at the ground floor, and we're at a subject which is close to my heart, of course, so maybe it's time for you to ask me about this one.
So, Ed, why did you choose this image?
I think you chose this image for me, Miriam, if I can be completely honest. But let me tell you about the research project. So this is an A to Z of the Holy Land, which is the second A to Z I've done. The first one looked at religion and belief in general, from atheism to zealotry. But this one is looking particularly at that region of the world that can be called so many different names: Holy Land, Promised Land, Occupied Land, Israel, Palestine, and so on. And it tries, as best I can, to offer a balanced and objective view of all the varieties that come up in that particular place. So 26 different articles of about 1,000 words each. We had fun with some letters, trying to get the right word, and I'm finishing it this summer. And here we have another research project. We've got these women having obviously a very good time, and Leah, who's coming to the end of her time here, but the project continues, is a social anthropologist, is that right?
Yes, she is.
Okay, so what's she working on here?
So she is really interested in investigating religious sisterhood. So these are Jewish and Muslim women who get together for all sorts of activities. They get together to cook, they get together to read things, to sort of organize cultural events, particularly the Nisa Nashim network, she's very interested in. And she basically becomes involved with these communities, see how interface dialogue works on a grassroots level, especially with women also.
So particularly with women, I mean that's the interesting because women have to navigate some of the issues, particularly those that do with patriarchy, in a very different way than men of course do. So what sorts of
but it also means that they have more in common because they are sort of facing the same struggle. And because Judaism and Islam are two religions that are so very, very close together in their legal structures, in the way that sort of religion is lived, it's these grassroots initiatives really have sort of provide the women with a lot of common ground that they can sort of bond over.
So what is it that makes the conversation between Muslim and Jewish women different than, say, between Muslim and Jewish men?
Well, firstly, they have a lot of common ground. They face a lot of the same battles because of the legal and sort of religious structures of Islam and Judaism being very, very similar. But what is most interesting for me is that within these female networks, we see women for the first time performing functions that they cannot have in mixed sort of audiences. For example, we see women suddenly leading prayer in these female-only groups. So we see that sort of partial authority is being sort of attained and created in this particular space of interfaith encounter that could not otherwise be created. I mean, if these Muslim women were among themselves, it wouldn't open up these opportunities. So it's the encounter, the friction that causes these new realms, these new areas to open up, which is absolutely fascinating.
What's this project about?
So this is a project by our research fellow Tobias Müller, for whom you are actually again.
So maybe I should say a few words about it.
I think you should probably say a few words about it.
So this project looks at strictly observant religion, and in particular its encounter with wider society. We had a big debate actually whether to call it fundamentalism or religious fundamentalism or not, because that's a term that's more known, if you like, in the wider population. But we've gone with the more tactical term, strictly orthodox or strictly religious, because many of these groups don't see themselves as fundamentalist or see the term fundamentalist as a criticism. Yes. And Tobias, who has a background particularly in Christian Muslim studies, is now to go out on research in London, in living within these communities and exploring what their issues, the issues that they're facing.
Yes, and it's a beautiful image. It is so good for the project.
It says what it is.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
We're now at an image, another manuscript in your area, but this is Mohammed's project.
Yes, and this time it's actually a complete manuscript, not scraps. So this is Judeo-Arabic poetry, so it's Arabic that's written in Hebrew characters. And what's so beautiful about these leaves here is that this person was writing this in the 12th, 13th century, but he was actually writing pieces of poetry from as early as the 8th century. So this Jewish person in medieval Cairo writes poetry from the 7th century from Arabia, from 8th century Baghdad. So we see this love for Arabic poetry shining through. And this really shows again the connections, the really tight connections in the Middle East between the different communities, this shared cultural heritage. And what makes these fragments extremely special is that some of these poems are known nowadays, but they have actually only been sort of been transmitted in slightly corrupted form. So our fragments here actually improve upon existing readings and make them better. They're often more elegant. They're often sort of, you can feel this is the original here. This
and
is
you
a
need
much
someone
older text.
who is a real scholar of literature.
Well, I mean, Muhammad is absolutely uniquely suited. He is a poet himself. He writes poetry, and I think he even has won a prize for one of his poetry books quite recently. He can read Hebrew, but he cannot only read Hebrew, he can also read Hebrew manuscripts, which are not that easy. And he's also, he speaks Arabic, he's an Arabist. He's absolutely perfect for this project.
So now that we've got literature, we've got music, we've got sociology, we've got social anthropology, we have theologians, political science, and
linguists.
Not bad.
Yes, no. I mean, that's the whole point. We want to have as many perspectives in the Woolf Institute.
Well, actually, it's a serious point, isn't it? Because to understand the relationship between people or between religions and society, you have to have a multitude of disciplines.
We need to look at it from all perspectives.
Yeah. We've talked a little bit about living in harmony with Dunya, and this is the second researcher working with you,
so this is Marav Rosenblatt, who is the co-PI of the project, and she focuses on Jewish and Muslim communities in Baghdad in the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s. So it's all about this exploration of, you know, Jewish Muslim heritage in Iraq.
And this is a synagogue in Iraq.
This is a synagogue in Iraq. Yes, you can see that the Hebrew here, but of course they would also use Arabic script because
that's how
you know that's part of the heritage, the Jewish Arabic heritage.
So let's carry on walking down, and what we've got here is another PhD student who's finishing, we hope, soon.
Yes, he's on maternity leave at the moment.
Okay, that's allowed.
Yes, she's just had a baby.
And Amin has been looking at the role of Muslim leadership in Paris and London.
Yes, and Amin was our second PhD scholar, and for us it was extremely important to support someone from a non-traditional Oxbridge background. So Amin came to us from Morocco. We supported him to come here to actually start a PhD, and it's been wonderful to see him thrive because he was quite shy in the beginning. You know, he couldn't sort of express some of the things in a way that, you know, would be expected, and now he's this amazing scholar. You know, he sort of, when he talks, I'm absolutely mesmerized. He really has.
He's grown up, isn't he?
He's grown up into this wonderful scholar, and you know, it's great pride to see that we support these students from these backgrounds to sort of really fully sort of realize their potential. So Amin works on mosques in France and in Britain in comparison, and one of the most interesting finds is that he shows how bureaucracy is slowly taking over the mosques. So how the mosques have to adjust to modern sort of British, quite bureaucratic life, sort of all the you know, the paperwork that needs to be filled out, all the red tape, and it's really, really interesting to see this in a context of a mosque.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because now we're talking about France and the UK,
yes.
and we were talking about Spain earlier with Rodrigo, and Iraq and Baghdad and Syria and Aleppo. And so our projects are not only multidisciplinary but international. As we've walked through the building, there were one or two pictures that we didn't stop at because they were projects that we'd already completed.
Yes.
And the one behind us here is one of those. And I mention it because, of course, it looked at not only the UK but India and Qatar.
Yes.
So this is a picture of one of the researchers, Jan Jonathan Bock, but we also passed two, Sami Everett and John Fahey. And this, in a way, was a precursor to the project that Kit is doing, because it looked at interfaith initiatives in those three countries, very, very different places.
Yes, and produced a beautiful report.
That's
right.
Actually
quite rightly read. I'm still very often asked about that report.
Are you?
Yeah,
yes,
people
great.
really are reading it, and
because that's another thing, isn't it? Is that the research has to have an impact. So it's not only producing sort of traditional academic monographs, but it's producing policy reports or
public
training.
education.
That's right.
Training, all sorts of educational.
Yes, and this report is called Trust in Dialogue. Question mark.
Yes.
So we're now towards the bottom of that lower ground floor of the building. We come to our last PhD student and our most recent one. And I have to say, I love this title, Love Your Neighbour, You All. What's going on here?
So he is working on evangelical communities in the US and the way that they try to engage with Muslim communities. And it's always this tension of sort of being friendly, being welcoming, but not being proselytizing, because that's very often something that we see, that people are sort of trying to be sort of encouraged to convert to other religions. And yeah, so this in this sort of field of tension, Sam works. He works on communities in Tennessee, right?
That's right. So he's only just finished his first year, and he's about to go. Has he gone to the States?
He has just gone to the States to start
for his field work.
Yeah,
yeah. And you'd think in a place like Tennessee, where there's a fairly robust evangelical Pentecostal community or variety of communities, is a perfect place to explore the encounter. And I know his particular interest is in the Christian-Muslim encounter and sort of the hospitality that can be found in both. Well, thank you. We've finished our tour, and it really shows that diversity that we've got at the Woolf Institute. So when we come down in 20 years' time...
I hope the exhibition will be like
10 times as long.